They thought I'd stay silent forever. They assumed I'd remain their walking ATM, ready to bail them out of every financial mess they created. But when I discovered my own brother had stolen my life savings, then had the audacity to demand another $30,000 for his new house, I made a decision that would change everything. This time, they were going to pay the price, and I was going to make sure they remembered exactly what it felt like to lose everything they thought they were entitled to. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for the first time in 36 years, I could hear myself think. The silence in my one-bedroom apartment on Cleveland's west side wasn't the oppressive kind I'd grown up with, the kind that came after explosive family fights about money, after I'd written yet another check to cover someone else's mistakes. This was different. This was the sound of freedom, even if it came wrapped in loneliness. I'd been living here for 8 months now, ever since I finally worked up the courage to cut the financial umbilical cord that had kept me tethered to my family's endless crises. The apartment wasn't much 700 square feet of worn hardwood floors and temperamental radiators, but it was mine. Every stick of furniture, every dish in the sink, every bill that arrived in the mailbox had my name on it, and my name alone. The move to Cleveland had been strategic, far enough from Columbus to avoid surprise visits, close enough to my job at Harborline Consulting to maintain the career I'd built despite years of family interference. The consulting firm specialized in financial restructuring for small businesses, which felt grimly appropriate given how many times I'd restructured my own finances to accommodate other people's emergencies. My morning routine had become sacred. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., black and strong, while I reviewed client portfolios on my laptop. The apartment faced east, so the sunrise painted my small kitchen table in golden light that made even the chipped ceramic mug look elegant. No one called demanding gas money. No one showed up expecting me to cover their portion of a family dinner bill. No one guilt-tripped me about being selfish with my own paycheck. The silence from my family had been deafening, but not surprising. When the bank account stopped flowing in their direction, their interest in maintaining any real relationship had dried up faster than summer rain on hot pavement. 8 months. And the only communication I'd received was a generic group text about my cousin's wedding that felt more like an obligation than an invitation. I'd gotten used to eating dinner alone, watching Netflix without anyone criticizing my show choices, and falling asleep without my phone buzzing with financial emergencies. The loneliness was real, I won't pretend it wasn't, especially on weekends when I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call Mom before remembering that our conversations had never been about how I was doing anyway. But this apartment, this life, was honest. The bills I paid were for services I actually used. The food in my refrigerator was chosen by me. For me. The money in my checking account stayed there until I decided what to do with it. After 20 years of being the family's unofficial bank, the concept of financial autonomy felt revolutionary. Working at Harborline had given me perspective too. I spent my days helping business owners untangle themselves from toxic financial relationships, teaching them to set boundaries with vendors who took advantage of their generosity, showing them how to protect their assets from people who saw their success as an opportunity rather than an achievement. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been giving this advice professionally while living the opposite in my personal life. My colleagues didn't know about my family situation, and I intended to keep it that way. As far as they were concerned, Rachel Monroe was a competent financial consultant who lived a quiet, drama-free life. No one needed to know about the years of co-signing loans that went unpaid, or the temporary living arrangements that stretched into months, or the way family gatherings inevitably ended with someone pulling me aside to discuss their latest financial crisis. The apartment building was full of people living their own independent lives. Mrs. Rodriguez downstairs worked double shifts at the hospital and still found time to tend a small garden behind the building. The college student across the hall was putting himself through school without family money, juggling 3 part-time jobs with impressive determination. These were people who understood that financial independence meant more than just having money. It meant having choices. On quiet evenings, I'd sit by my window overlooking the street and watch normal families walking together. Parents pushing strollers, teenagers arguing with their siblings about trivial things. Sometimes I felt a pang of something not exactly regret, but a recognition of what I'd never really had, a family that saw me as a person rather than a resource. But mostly, I felt relief. Relief that my bank account balance reflected my actual spending. Relief that my credit score was mine alone. Relief that when I saved money, it stayed saved. I was building something real here, a life where my value wasn't measured by my willingness to subsidize other people's poor decisions. The silence from Columbus had stretched so long that I'd begun to believe they'd finally accepted my boundaries. I was naive enough to think that maybe, just maybe, they'd learned to solve their own problems. I should have known better. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9:15 a.m. when I logged into my savings account to transfer money for a security deposit on a house I'd been eyeing in Lakewood. The number on the screen made me blink twice, certain I'd clicked on the wrong account. $42,317. Gone. My hands trembled as I refreshed the page, then logged out and back in again. The balance remained stubbornly, impossibly low, $843, the same amount I'd had in checking. My savings account, the one I'd been building for 6 years, depositing every bonus, every tax refund, every overtime penny had been drained to almost nothing. I called the bank immediately, my voice shaking as I explained to the customer service representative that there had to be some mistake. She put me on hold while she reviewed my account activity, and during those endless minutes of elevator music, my mind raced through possibilities: identity theft, a computer glitch, anything except the truth that was already forming in the pit of my stomach. "Ma'am, I'm showing several large withdrawals over the past 3 months," the representative said when she returned. "All were made with proper authorization using your account information and secondary identification." "That's impossible. I haven't made any large withdrawals." "The withdrawals were made at our Columbus branch locations. I show transactions on March 15th, April 2nd, and May 20th. Do you have anyone else authorized on this account?" My blood turned to ice. I'd added Ethan to my savings account years ago during one of his financial crises, when he needed emergency access to help his then-girlfriend with medical bills. I'd meant to remove him afterward, but life had gotten busy, and then I'd moved away from all the drama, and somehow it had slipped my mind entirely. "Can you tell me who made those withdrawals?" I asked, though I already knew. "I can only confirm they were made by an authorized user with proper identification. You'll need to come into a branch for more detailed information." I drove to the closest bank branch in a haze of disbelief and rising fury. The manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a patient demeanor, pulled up my account history and confirmed what I'd feared. Ethan Monroe had walked into 3 different Columbus branches and systematically emptied my savings account. $20,000 in March, $15,000 in April, $7,317 in May. "Was there any documentation required for these withdrawals?" I asked, staring at the transaction history printout. "For amounts over $10,000, we require additional verification, but since he was listed as an authorized user and provided proper identification, the transactions were approved. I'm so sorry, Ms. Monroe. These situations with family members are unfortunately more common than you might think." I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the papers that documented the systematic theft of my future. That money wasn't just savings, it was 6 years of sacrifices. 6 years of buying generic groceries instead of name brands, of driving my old Honda instead of getting something newer, of skipping vacations and shopping trips and dinners out. 6 years of saying no to myself so I could say yes to a house of my own. The house in Lakewood had a small backyard and original hardwood floors. The kitchen needed updating, but it had good bones and was in a neighborhood where I could walk to coffee shops and the library. I'd driven by it 17 times, imagining myself painting the front door blue, planting flowers along the walkway, hosting small dinner parties for the few friends I'd managed to maintain despite my family's chaos. Now it was gone. All of it. I called Ethan first. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail, his voice cheerful and carefree. "Hey, you've reached Ethan, leave a message and I'll get back to you." I hung up without speaking. I tried Mom next. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious in a way that told me she already knew why I was calling. "Rachel, honey, how are you?" "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Do you know anything about money being taken from my savings account?" Silence, long enough that I could hear her television in the background, some daytime talk show discussing relationship drama that suddenly felt too close to home. "Honey, maybe you should talk to Ethan about this." "So you do know?" "Look, Rachel, he was in a really tough spot. The business hasn't been doing well, and Jessica's been pressuring him about getting a place together. He just needed a little help to get back on his feet." "A little help, Mom? He stole over $40,000 from me." "Stole is such a harsh word. You've always been so good with money, and family helps family. You know you'd never let your brother end up homeless." The casual dismissal of what had happened hit me like a physical blow. I worked 6 years to save that money. It was for a house. My house. "Oh, sweetie, you're being dramatic. You're young, you have a good job, you'll save up again. Ethan needed it now." I ended the call and immediately tried my father. His response was somehow worse, a rambling justification about how Ethan had always been less stable financially, how I was the responsible one who would figure it out, how families were supposed to look out for each other. When I finally reached my younger sister Emma, her reaction was the most honest. "Oh God, Rachel, I was wondering when you'd find out. I told them this was insane, but nobody listens to me." "How long have you known?" "Since the first withdrawal. Ethan was bragging about finally getting his life together, and Mom kept talking about how nice it was that you were helping him out. I thought you knew." That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by bank statements and printed emails, trying to piece together the timeline of my own financial destruction. While I'd been building a life in Cleveland, celebrating small victories like paying off my car early and building my credit score, my own family had been systematically robbing me blind. The betrayal cut deeper than the money itself. They'd watched me struggle, watched me make sacrifices, watched me choose financial responsibility over immediate gratification, and then they'd decided that my discipline was their opportunity. As I stared at the evidence of their theft, I realized something that chilled me more than the empty account. They weren't sorry. They weren't planning to pay it back. They thought they were entitled to it, simply because I was family and I'd always been the one to fix everyone else's mistakes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sad or disappointed by my family's behavior. I was furious. The audacity arrived 3 weeks later in the form of a group text sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night. I was in bed, finally having a decent week after the shock of discovering my empty savings account, when my phone buzzed with a message that made my blood pressure spike so fast I actually felt dizzy. The text was from Mom, sent to me, Dad, Emma, and presumably Ethan himself. Exciting news. Ethan and Jessica found the perfect house in Worthington colonial style. 4 bedrooms, great schools for future grandkids. They need to move fast in this market, though. Closing costs are higher than expected. Rachel, could you help with the down payment? They need about $30,000 by next Friday. Family investment in family future. So proud of our boy. I stared at the message for a full minute, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The casual entitlement was breathtaking. The assumption that I would, of course, provide another $30,000 to the brother who had just stolen over $40,000 from me was so monumentally insane that I almost laughed. Almost. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan directly. "Hey sis, did you see Mom's text? I know the timing isn't great, but this house is perfect. We can pay you back once the business picks up. You know how much this means to me and Jess. You've always been there for family." Then, Jessica herself chimed in with her own message. "Rachel, I'm so excited about the house. Ethan told me how generous you've always been with helping family. We promise to pay you back as soon as we can. This is such a blessing. I sat up in bed, my laptop already in my hands, typing a response that I deleted 3 times before settling on something that wouldn't get me arrested. I'm not able to help with this. The response was immediate. My phone started ringing. Ethan. Rachel, come on, don't be like this. Don't be like what exactly? You know what I mean. Selfish. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. The house is in a great neighborhood, and we got a good deal because the seller wants to close fast. We just need bridge financing until my next contract comes through. I could hear Jessica in the background, her voice high and excited, talking about cabinet colors and backyard gardens. The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. Ethan, where do you think I would get $30,000? Silence. Then, I don't know, your savings. You've always been good at saving money. My savings that you stole. I didn't steal anything. I borrowed it, and I'm going to pay it back. When? Soon. Look, I know you're upset about that, but this house thing is time sensitive. We can deal with the other stuff later. I hung up. The calls kept coming. Dad phoned at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, waking me up with a guilt trip that could have powered a small city. Rachel, your brother needs this. You've always been the stable one. This is what family does for each other. What has family done for me lately? Dad. Don't be ridiculous. We've always supported you. When name one time. He couldn't. Of course. The conversation ended with him calling me ungrateful and selfish, words that had lost their sting through overuse. Mom tried a different approach, calling during my lunch break with tears in her voice. I don't understand why you're being so mean to your brother. He's trying to build a life with Jessica. Don't you want him to be happy? What about my happiness? Mom, what about the life I was trying to build with the money he stole? You keep saying he stole it, but he's family. Family doesn't steal from family. So then what would you call taking $40,000 without permission? I'd call it family helping family in a time of need. Emma, to her credit, was the only one who seemed to grasp the insanity of the situation. They're all completely delusional, she said during a late-night phone call. Ethan's been telling everyone that you loaned him the money, and now they think asking for more is totally normal. Loaned. That's the story he's telling, that you've been helping him out while he gets his business off the ground, and that you're happy to invest in his future. The lies were almost as shocking as the theft itself. Ethan had rewritten history to make himself the victim and me the willing accomplice. In his version of events, I was the generous sister who believed in his potential, not the woman whose life savings he'd pillaged without permission. But the most infuriating part was the complete absence of acknowledgement about what he'd done. There was no apology, no recognition that he'd violated my trust, no understanding that he'd destroyed years of careful planning. Instead, there was only expectation that I would continue to fund his life while he and Jessica planned their dream home with my stolen money. The pressure campaign intensified throughout the week. Text messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all with variations of the same theme: family helps family. Don't you want Ethan to be happy? You've always been so generous. This is such a great opportunity for them. Jessica's mother even called me, a woman I'd met exactly twice, to lecture me about supporting young couples and investing in family futures. The fact that a stranger felt entitled to demand my money for her daughter's benefit was somehow the perfect capstone to the entire surreal experience. By Thursday night, the deadline looming, the calls had turned desperate and then angry. Ethan left a voicemail at 10:30 p.m. that I saved for posterity. Rachel, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this vindictive attitude isn't like you. We're going to lose this house because of your selfishness. Jessica is crying, and I don't know what to tell her. This is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives, and you're ruining it. That voicemail was the moment everything crystallized for me. They weren't just asking for money. They were demanding it. They felt entitled to it. And when I dared to say no, I became the villain in their story. They had stolen my future and were now angry that I wouldn't fund theirs. The realization that followed was cold and clean and absolutely liberating. I was done being their bank. But more than that, I was done being their victim. It was time to collect some interest on their debt. That Friday night, after Ethan's deadline had passed and my phone finally stopped buzzing with increasingly frantic messages, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of every dollar I'd given my family. The numbers were staggering. Ethan's car repair after he rear-ended someone while texting $4,200, just until insurance pays out, which never happened because he'd let his coverage lapse. Emma's college tuition when Dad's business investment fell through her sophomore year, $12,000 across 2 semesters. She graduated, got a good job, never mentioned paying me back. Mom's emergency dental work when she cracked a tooth, $3,800. We'll figure out a payment plan, she'd said, then never brought it up again. Dad's failed restaurant venture, $18,000 for equipment and initial inventory. This is our chance to build generational wealth, he'd promised. The restaurant closed in 6 months. Ethan's security deposit and first month's rent when his last girlfriend kicked him out, $2,400, just to get back on my feet. The list went on for pages. Car insurance payments when someone forgot to pay theirs. Grocery bills when money was tight. Medical copays, phone bills, utility deposits. Christmas gifts for their kids when they'd overspent on the holidays. 23 years of being the family ATM. Over $90,000 in loans that were never repaid, gifts that were never reciprocated, and emergencies that somehow only I was expected to solve. But it wasn't just the money. It was the pattern that emerged as I wrote, the clear picture of a family that had systematically erased my needs from the equation. When I'd graduated college, nobody came to the ceremony because Ethan had a baseball game that same weekend. When I'd gotten my first promotion at work, the celebration dinner turned into a discussion about Dad's latest business idea and how I could help fund it. When I'd been in a car accident 2 years ago and called Mom from the emergency room, she'd stayed on the phone for exactly 3 minutes before saying she had to go because Ethan was coming over for dinner. I remembered my 28th birthday party, which I'd hosted and paid for myself, where the only gift I received was a request from Emma to co-sign her lease because her credit score was too low. I remembered last Christmas, when I'd driven 4 hours to Columbus with presents for everyone, only to discover they'd exchanged gifts without me earlier in the week because it was more convenient. Every milestone in my life had been overshadowed by someone else's crisis. Every achievement had been minimized or ignored entirely. Every time I'd needed emotional support, I'd been told I was too sensitive or making a big deal out of nothing. They had trained me to believe that my value as a family member was directly proportional to my bank account balance. When I was useful, I was loved. When I set boundaries, I was selfish. The cruel irony was that while I'd been sacrificing my own dreams to fund theirs, they'd been painting me as the lucky one. I was the responsible one, the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. They told this story so often that I'd started to believe it myself, thinking that maybe I owed them something for my stability. But looking at my financial history, I realized the truth was exactly the opposite. I wasn't successful despite my family. I was successful despite having to constantly bail them out. I'd built my career while bleeding money to support their poor decisions. I'd maintained my credit score while co-signing their loans. I'd saved for my future while funding their presents. Every dollar I'd given them was a dollar I couldn't invest in myself. Every crisis I'd solved for them was an opportunity I'd missed to build my own life. Every time I'd said yes to their emergencies, I'd said no to my own dreams. The house in Lakewood wasn't just about wanting a nice place to live. It was about proving to myself that all those sacrifices had been worth something, that I could take care of everyone else and still take care of myself. That being the family's financial safety net wouldn't prevent me from building my own security. But they'd made sure it did. Ethan hadn't just stolen my savings. He'd stolen the proof that I could have both family loyalty and personal success. He'd stolen my belief that I could be generous without being stupid. And now they wanted more. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of decades of financial abuse disguised as family loyalty, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt that had always accompanied my attempts to set boundaries evaporated. The voice in my head that whispered, "But they're family," finally went silent. They weren't family. They were users who happened to share my DNA. Real family doesn't steal your life savings and then demand more. Real family doesn't erase your accomplishments and minimize your struggles. Real family doesn't see you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. I thought about Jessica planning her dream kitchen with my stolen money, about Ethan telling people I'd loaned him $40,000, about Mom calling me selfish for refusing to fund their lifestyle. They weren't just taking my money, they were rewriting history to make themselves the victims and me the villain. But if they wanted to cast me as the villain in their story, I was finally ready to play the part. I opened my laptop and started researching. If my family insisted on treating me like a bank, then it was time I started acting like one. Banks don't just give money away. They keep detailed records. They charge interest. They have terms and conditions. And when borrowers default, banks have collection procedures. It was time to call in some debts. The documentation phase took me 3 weeks of meticulous work. But by the end of it, I had built a case that would make any prosecutor proud. I started with the bank records, printing every statement going back 5 years. Each withdrawal Ethan had made was highlighted in yellow, with dates, amounts, and branch locations clearly marked. The pattern was damning systematic, calculated theft that coincided perfectly with his business struggles and relationship milestones. Next came the digital evidence. I screenshot every text message from the past month, starting with Mom's cheerful announcement about needing $30,000 and ending with Ethan's angry voicemail about my vindictive attitude. I organized them chronologically, creating a timeline that showed not just the demand for more money, but their complete lack of remorse for what had already been taken. The email trail was even more revealing. Buried in my inbox were messages from Ethan dating back to March. Casual mentions of getting his finances sorted out and finally being able to invest in his future. In one particularly nauseating email to the whole family, he'd written about feeling blessed to have such a supportive sister who believes in my potential. Reading it now, knowing he'd written it the same week he'd stolen $20,000 from me, made my hands shake with rage. I made copies of everything, physical copies in a filing system that would make my accounting professors weep with pride, and digital backups stored in 3 separate cloud accounts. If this was going to be war, I was going to be the most prepared soldier on the battlefield. The legal research came next. I called my college roommate Sarah, who'd become a family law attorney in Cincinnati, under the pretense of asking general questions about financial elder abuse for a client situation. The conversation was enlightening. Unauthorized access to bank accounts by family members is surprisingly common. Sarah told me during our lunch meeting the following Saturday. The tricky part is usually proving intent and getting people to pursue it legally. Family members often feel too guilty to press charges. Hypothetically, what would someone need to prove theft? Documentation of unauthorized access, evidence that the account holder didn't give permission, and ideally, proof that the person who took the money knew they weren't authorized to do so. She paused, studying my face. "Rachel, this isn't about a client, is it?" I told her everything. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing grimmer as the story unfolded. "You have a solid case for theft," she said finally. "The fact that he was on the account originally complicates things. But his continued access after you moved and established financial independence, combined with the amounts and his deception about it afterward, definitely crosses the line into criminal behavior." Well, what about the family pressure for more money? Does that factor in? It shows a pattern of financial manipulation and supports the argument that this wasn't a misunderstanding. The fact that they're demanding additional funds while refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing demonstrates ongoing intent to exploit you financially. Sarah gave me the contact information for a criminal attorney who specialized in financial crimes, but also suggested something else. Sometimes the threat of legal action is more effective than actual legal action, especially when reputation matters to the people involved. That gave me an idea for a two-pronged approach: legal consequences for Ethan, social consequences for everyone. I spent the next week crafting what I privately called the documentation package. It was a comprehensive overview of my family's financial exploitation, complete with bank records, screenshots, and a timeline that read like a crime novel. The package was professional, factual, and absolutely devastating. But documentation was only half the battle. I needed to identify the right audience for maximum impact. I started with social media reconnaissance, something that felt dirty but necessary. Ethan and Jessica had been posting constantly about house hunting, sharing photos of open houses and discussing their exciting next chapter. Jessica's Instagram was particularly galling dozens of posts about their dream home journey and their amazing support system. Their support system, my stolen money. I made a list of everyone who mattered to them: Jessica's parents, who were prominent in their church community; Ethan's business partners, who probably didn't know their colleague was funding his lifestyle through theft; their mutual friends, who'd been liking and commenting on all the house hunting posts; and the extended family members who'd been pressuring me to contribute to their investment. But I needed more than just social media followers. I needed people with influence, people whose opinions mattered, people who could make Ethan and Jessica's lives uncomfortable in ways that went beyond embarrassment. That's when I remembered Marcus Sullivan, Ethan's business partner and the man whose approval Ethan craved more than anyone else's. Marcus was old school, conservative, the kind of man who believed in earning your way and paying your debts. His construction company had a reputation built on integrity and reliability qualities that wouldn't align well with having a partner who stole from family members. I also remembered Jessica's boss at the marketing firm where she worked. Jessica had mentioned her several times, always with a mixture of admiration and intimidation. The woman apparently valued professionalism and ethical behavior above all else, and had been known to terminate employees whose personal lives reflected poorly on the company. The plan crystallizing in my mind wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about making sure everyone who'd supported, enabled, or benefited from my family's financial abuse understood exactly what they'd been celebrating. I opened a new document and began typing what I thought of as my manifesto, a clear, calm explanation of what had happened, backed by irrefutable evidence, designed to shatter the carefully constructed narrative my family had built around their behavior. But first, I needed to make one more call. I dialed the number Sarah had given me for the criminal attorney, and when his secretary answered, I said the words I'd been practicing all week. I need to discuss pressing charges against a family member for theft. As I waited to be transferred, I looked around my small apartment, my honest apartment, where every piece of furniture had been earned and every bill was paid with my own money. After 23 years of being their victim, I was finally ready to be their reckoning. The only question now was whether they were ready for me. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning at 8:30 a.m. when I sent a carefully crafted email to Marcus Sullivan with the subject line, "Important information regarding your business partner." The message was professional, factual, and devastating. I attached bank statements showing Ethan's unauthorized withdrawals, screenshots of his lies about loaning arrangements, and a timeline that made his theft impossible to deny. I ended with a simple statement: I thought you should know the character of the person representing your company. By 10:15 a.m., Marcus had forwarded my email to Ethan with a single line: "Explain this. My office. Now." I knew this because Emma called me, breathless with panic. "Rachel, what did you do?" Ethan just called me crying. He said Marcus is furious and might dissolve their partnership. I told the truth. But his business should probably be run by someone who doesn't steal from family members. The second target was Jessica's world. I'd done my research on Linda Hartwell, Jessica's boss at Preston Marketing Group. Linda's LinkedIn profile was full of posts about ethical leadership and integrity in business. Her company's website prominently featured their core values: honesty, accountability, and community trust. I crafted a different approach for Linda. Instead of sending documentation directly, I arranged for her to discover the truth organically. I'd learned from Jessica's social media that Preston Marketing was handling the grand opening for a new client, a family-owned restaurant that prided itself on honest, home-cooked meals and family values. I attended the opening event, timing my arrival perfectly. Linda was there, schmoozing with clients and potential customers, while Jessica worked the room with her usual enthusiasm. I waited until Linda was in conversation with the restaurant owners, a sweet, elderly couple who kept talking about the importance of family and supporting each other through thick and thin. That's when I introduced myself to the group as Jessica's boyfriend's sister, and mentioned how excited I was that Jessica and Ethan had found their dream house with the money he took from my savings account. I said it conversationally, as if it were common knowledge, then immediately pivoted to complimenting the restaurant's decor. The elderly couple looked confused. Linda's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. Jessica, who'd been standing close enough to hear, went pale. "I'm sorry, did you say he took money from your account?" Linda asked. "Oh, yes, over $40,000, and then they asked for 30 more for the down payment." I smiled brightly. Family dynamics can be so complicated, can't they? I excused myself to get a drink, leaving Jessica to deal with the aftermath. From across the room, I watched her fumble through an explanation that only made things worse. Linda's questions became more pointed, her professional smile increasingly strained. The third strike came through Aunt Margaret, my father's sister and the family's unofficial moral authority. Margaret was a retired Sunday school teacher who believed firmly in confession, repentance, and making things right. She was also the person whose opinion carried the most weight with my parents' generation. I visited Margaret under the pretense of wanting to reconnect with family. She welcomed me warmly, bustling around her kitchen making tea and asking about my life in Cleveland. When she asked why she hadn't seen me at recent family gatherings, I told her the truth. Margaret listened in growing horror as I explained Ethan's theft and the family's response. I showed her the bank statements, the text messages demanding more money, the voicemails calling me selfish. Her face grew redder with each piece of evidence. "Rachel Marie, this is stealing. Plain and simple stealing." Margaret's voice carried the moral authority of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching children right from wrong. "And your parents know about this. They think I should give him $30,000 more dollars." Margaret stood up abruptly, her teacup clattering against its saucer. "We'll see about that." Within hours, Margaret had called every family member in her contact list. The conversations were apparently spectacular. Emma texted me updates throughout the evening. "Aunt Margaret just called Mom. I could hear her yelling from upstairs." Then, "Now she's calling Dad. This is insane." And finally, she called Ethan too. He hung up on her, so she called Jessica directly. The fourth target was the most personal: Jessica's parents. They'd been vocal supporters of the house purchase, even calling me to pressure me into contributing. I'd discovered through social media that they were active in their church community and took pride in their reputation as upstanding citizens. I sent them a package through certified mail copies of all the evidence, along with a cover letter explaining that their daughter was planning to build her future in a house purchased with stolen money. I included printouts of Jessica's social media posts celebrating their blessing and amazing support system, with annotations showing which support had actually been theft. The letter ended with a question that I knew would eat at them. "Is this the foundation you want your daughter's marriage built on?" The effects rippled outward faster than I'd anticipated. By Thursday, Jessica's Instagram posts about the house had disappeared. By Friday, Ethan had stopped answering calls from mutual friends who'd heard whispers about some kind of family financial drama. By Saturday, my parents were fielding uncomfortable questions from neighbors who'd heard from Margaret about the terrible situation with that poor girl's savings account. The most satisfying response came from Marcus Sullivan himself. He called me directly on Sunday afternoon, his voice gruff but respectful. "Ms. Monroe, I want you to know that I've dissolved my partnership with your brother effective immediately. I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never associated myself with someone who steals from family. I'm sorry for what you've been through. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I hope you get your money back. And if you need a reference for what kind of person you are versus what kind of person he is, you have my number. But the real victory came Monday morning, when Jessica called me directly. Her voice was shaky, defeated. Rachel, we need to talk. The house deal fell through. Ethan's business partnership is over. My boss is asking questions about my judgment and character. My parents they're devastated. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. And honestly, I don't blame you. I had no idea about any of this when we asked for the money. Ethan told me you'd offered to help, that you were excited about us getting the house. And now? Now I'm wondering what other lies he's told me. She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. Rachel, I want you to know that I'm leaving him. I can't build a life with someone who would steal from his own sister and then lie about it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my campaign had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had shown people who Ethan really was, not the charming, struggling entrepreneur they thought they knew, but a man who would steal from the person who'd supported him most, then demand more while calling her selfish. The truth, it turned out, was the most devastating weapon of all. They came to my apartment on a Wednesday evening at 6:45 p.m., just as I was settling down with dinner and a book. The aggressive pounding on my door told me everything I needed to know about their emotional state before I even looked through the peephole. All three of them stood in the hallway. Mom, Dad, and Ethan. Mom was crying. Dad looked furious. Ethan appeared to have aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks, his face gaunt and his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. I took my time opening the door, checking the deadbolt and considering my options. Part of me wanted to leave them standing there, to let them experience what it felt like to have their needs ignored, but I was curious to hear what they'd come to say. Rachel! Mom pushed past me the moment I opened the door, her voice thick with tears. We need to talk about this madness. You're destroying our family. Dad followed her in, his jaw set in that familiar expression of righteous indignation that had intimidated me as a child. This has gone far enough. You've humiliated us in front of the entire community. Ethan was the last to enter, moving slowly like a man walking to his execution. He couldn't meet my eyes, which was probably the first smart decision he'd made in months. Please, sit down, I said, gesturing to my small living room. I remained standing, arms crossed, watching them settle uncomfortably on my furniture. Mom launched into her prepared speech immediately. Rachel, honey, I know you're upset about the money situation, but what you've done is so much worse than anything Ethan did. You've ruined his business, destroyed his relationship, turned the whole family against each other. This isn't the daughter I raised. The daughter you raised was an ATM with legs, I replied calmly. I'm trying something different now. Dad leaned forward, his voice carrying that patronizing tone that had always made my skin crawl. Rachel, family is about forgiveness. It's about supporting each other through difficult times. Yes, Ethan made some mistakes. Mistakes. I laughed, the sound sharp in the small room. Dad, he stole over $40,000 from me, then demanded $30,000 more. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. But family doesn't press charges against family, Mom sobbed. Family doesn't air dirty laundry in public. What you've done is vindictive and cruel. I looked directly at Ethan, who was staring at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Do you have anything to say? Or are you going to let Mom and Dad fight your battles for you like always? He finally looked up, his eyes filled with what might have been genuine remorse. Rachel, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I was desperate, and I made bad choices. But what you've done has destroyed everything I've worked for. Everything you worked for was built on money you stole from me. I was going to pay you back. Well, when you've had 3 weeks to mention paying me back, and instead you demanded more money. If I hadn't found out, would you have ever told me? Silence. The kind of silence that answers every question. Mom jumped back in, her voice rising to that familiar pitch that meant she was losing control. We came here to find a solution, but you're being impossible. Ethan said he's sorry. What more do you want? I want my money back. Every penny. With interest for the months he's had it. Dad snorted. Interest from your own brother. He's not acting like my brother. Brothers don't steal. Brothers don't lie. Brothers don't try to destroy their sister's future to fund their own lifestyle. You're being dramatic, Mom said. It's just money. You'll make more. The casual dismissal of 6 years of my financial sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. Just money, Mom. That was my house fund, my security, my future, and he stole it to impress a girlfriend who left him the moment she learned the truth. Ethan flinched at that, but said nothing. We can work out a payment plan, Dad said, switching to his negotiation voice. Something reasonable. Ethan's business is gone now thanks to you, but he can get another job, start paying you back gradually. His business is gone because Marcus Sullivan has integrity, something this family apparently doesn't understand. That's enough, Dad snapped, his facade of reasonableness cracking. You've made your point. You've punished us all. Now it's time to be the bigger person and help us fix this mess. I stared at him, genuinely amazed. Help you fix the mess that Ethan created by stealing from me. Help us fix the mess you created by being vindictive and petty. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, facing the consequences of their actions, they were trying to make me the villain. Mom tried a different approach, her voice dropping to that manipulative whisper she'd perfected over the years. Rachel, sweetheart, we're family. We're supposed to stick together. Ethan needs us now more than ever. His life is falling apart. His life is falling apart because it was built on lies and theft. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. But it is your responsibility as his sister? No. The word came out harder than I'd intended, cutting through her manipulation like a knife. It's not my responsibility to fund his mistakes. It's not my responsibility to enable his poor decisions. And it's not my responsibility to pretend that stealing from me was somehow acceptable because we share DNA. Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Rachel? I've lost everything. My business, my relationship, my reputation. Isn't that enough? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd been taking advantage of my generosity for over 2 decades, who'd stolen my future without a second thought, who'd demanded more even after being caught. I want my money back, all of it, and I want you to understand that you're not the victim here. You created this situation. You stole from me, lied about it, and then had the audacity to demand more while calling me selfish. The consequences you're facing aren't my fault, they're the natural result of your own choices. We can't pay it all back at once, Dad said. Be reasonable. I was reasonable for 23 years. I was reasonable every time someone needed money. I was reasonable when I co-signed loans that never got paid back. I was reasonable when I covered everyone else's emergencies while ignoring my own needs. I'm done being reasonable. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this exact moment. Ethan stole $42,317 from my savings account. Interest and penalties bring the total to $47,800. I want it back within 30 days, or I'm pressing charges. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom started crying harder. Dad's face turned red with rage. Ethan just stared at the papers like they were a death sentence. 30 days. Dad exploded. That's impossible. Then I guess Ethan better hope he can find a very good lawyer. You wouldn't really send your own brother to jail, Mom whispered. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw her flinch at what she found there. Try me. The money appeared in my account on day 28. Not gradually, not in installments, but all at once, $47,800 transferred at 2:37 p.m. On a Friday afternoon. I stared at the notification on my phone, hardly believing it was real. Emma called an hour later to fill in the details. "Mom and Dad took out a second mortgage on the house," she said, her voice hollow. "They liquidated Dad's retirement account. Ethan sold his truck and moved back in with them. The whole family is basically financially ruined, but they got your money." "Good." "Rachel, they're destroyed. Mom hasn't stopped crying in days. Dad looks like he's aged 10 years. And Ethan, he's like a ghost." I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no vindication, just a cold, clean sense of completion. They made their choices, Emma, every single one of them. "But they're family." "No, they're not. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and exploit. Family doesn't spend decades treating one person like an ATM and then act shocked when that person finally says no." The silence stretched between us until Emma spoke again, her voice small. "What happens now?" "Now I buy my house. I build my life. And I never have to wonder whether the people who claim to love me are just waiting for their next opportunity to take advantage of me." "And us, the family." I looked around my small apartment, thinking about the house in Lakewood that was back on the market, thinking about the future I could finally build with my own money, thinking about the peace that came with knowing my bank account was truly mine. There is no us, Emma. There never really was. There was just me funding everyone else's problems while pretending it was love. 3 weeks later, I closed on the house in Lakewood. The sellers had accepted my offer immediately, apparently. Cash buyers were rare in the current market. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the original hardwood floors, sunlight streaming through windows that belonged to me. The kitchen did need updating, just as I'd remembered. The backyard was smaller than I'd originally thought. The front door was already blue, which saved me the trouble of painting it. But it was mine. Every square foot purchased with money I'd earned, saved, and protected. No guilt attached to the down payment. No anxiety about whether I deserved it. No family members with their hands out, expecting me to share what I'd worked for. I planted flowers along the walkway that first weekend, something I'd dreamed about during all those years of living in rentals. Daffodils and tulips that would come back every spring, a promise to my future self that I'd still be here to see them bloom. The silence from my family was complete now. No phone calls, no text messages, no guilt trips or emergency requests. They'd finally learned what boundaries looked like, and apparently, they didn't like the view. Aunt Margaret reached out once, a brief email saying she was proud of me for standing up for myself, and that she'd always known I was stronger than the rest of them gave me credit for. It was the only family contact that didn't make me angry. 6 months after moving into my house, I got a wedding invitation. Emma was marrying her longtime boyfriend, and apparently, they'd decided I deserved an invitation despite everything. The card was addressed to Rachel Monroe, with no +1, arriving at my old apartment and forwarded by the postal service. I threw it away without opening the inner envelope. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint my small garden in golden light. The daffodils I'd planted were starting to show green shoots, preparing for next spring's display. My mortgage payment was automatically deducted from an account that contained only my money. My retirement fund was growing steadily, with contributions that no one else could access. For the first time in my adult life, my financial security was actually secure. My phone buzzed with a text from a coworker asking if I wanted to join her book club. I typed back yes without hesitation. Building real relationships, the kind based on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation, was another project I could finally afford to invest in. As darkness fell, I thought about the family I'd lost and realized it was the best trade I'd ever made. I'd exchanged decades of being used and manipulated for a life where my generosity was my choice, not their expectation, where my success benefited me instead of funding their failures, where no was a complete sentence that didn't require justification or apology. They'd taught me that love with conditions wasn't love at all, and in forcing me to choose between being their victim and being their enemy, they'd accidentally given me the greatest gift possible, the realization that I could choose neither. I could choose myself instead. The house settled around me with small creaking sounds, the comfortable noises of a home that belonged to someone who'd earned it honestly. Outside, my neighbors were living their own independent lives, building their own security, making their own choices about how to spend their money and their love. I raised my glass to the evening sky, toasting the family I'd lost and the life I'd finally found. Some prices were worth paying, even when they cost you everything you thought you wanted. Especially then. Thank you so much for listening to this revenge story. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts about Rachel's journey. What would you have done in her situation? Your engagement means everything to us.